Thanks. All right, so hopefully you guys aren't too mad. A little bit of the titles and content may have gotten a little mixed up. What I'm going to talk about today is the Army Network Campaign Plan, the 5 task orders that are current requirements for the Army to accomplish within the next 5 years or so. With that, we're going to talk about SSO, JRSS, JIE, and where those are today and how they apply to you. And then hopefully we'll have time to talk a little bit about the SSL orchestration, or break and inspect, as it's most commonly called in the DoD today. So Mike talked about me a little bit. One thing that I like to point out to customers and partners and things is that I've lived in a lot of your shoes. I deployed networks in Bahrain, Gitmo, Kuwait, and Iraq during JTF 160 and 170. I have run garrison systems in the Marine Corps as well as the tactical systems. So I know a lot of the pain points as far as what happens within the garrison units, within the G6s, the issues that you have to deal with there, as well as what happens when you are on a tactical deployment and you have to worry about email access, security, and things like that. Some people have stopped by the booth today, and I've reminisced about the nightmares of running tactical fiber and Cat5, and even at one point was asked to repeat that I had run networks over hashwire. It's all we had. So I've done several different things to make things work. One thing to point out, I am part of the Army team today at F5. What makes up the rest of the Army F5 team are 4 prior service members. If you have not met Doug Powers, is Doug in here right now? So Doug is a current warrant officer with the Georgia Guard. I am a former E5 in the Marine Corps. Mary Celestine, if you have not met her, is in here today, a retired sergeant major. Currently lives in Sierra Vista, retired out of NetCom. And then Michael Slavinsky, who's currently manning our booth, is a former U.S. Coast Guard member. I make fun of him because it's before it was DHA. It was, at that time, Department of Transportation. So that's always fun to pick on him for. So the reason I point that out is just so you guys know that the entire Army team is former DoD to an extent. We have lived in many of the pain points that a lot of you guys might hit on a regular basis. So my mission today is to kind of talk about, and this is a discussion. This won't be me up here preaching. I'm not going to tell you about product. I'm not going to try and sell you F5. I'm going to talk to you about some of the current task orders, the 5 task orders for the Army, and talk about the current mindset on how things are architected, how some of that may have gone askew, maybe some ideas on how we can change that. And this is from my perspective. It's not all opinion-based. A lot of this is based on fact. But if you have a comment or a question or you have a differing opinion, share it. I'm open to adjusting for fire on whatever's needed to make this as accurate as possible, because I've given this presentation probably about 6 times now at the AFCEA TechNet, or the Augusta TechNet in Germany, and at several other facilities around the Army. So I'm open to changing it if it seems wrong to you. So far, this has kind of hit very close to home for a lot of people. And the real goal is to sort of converse on objective reality, which basically means I'm not going to nitpick on what's done wrong and what's done right. I'm going to talk about what the current state of deployments are and where those are going and how long it's going to take to get there, to kind of help you adjust where you think you need to be. So one of the things that I did within this presentation is, has anybody read the Army Network Campaign Plan? It is a nightmare. It is several hundred pages of just words that make no sense. And I thought these comments were pretty applicable to this. These are from a professor of psychology at Harvard that basically says that, and no offense to anybody that wrote any of the documents, bad writers use complex words to confuse the people that are reading it, and the goal there is to evade responsibility. If you look at what your requirements are when you have an issue within your environment and you need to buy something, and you say, here are my requirements to this, and then it goes through contracting and everywhere else, and the words are changed, things are adjusted with all the legalese and all of that, and it gets to a point where the RFP hits the street and it's just complete, nobody knows what's going on there, except for the people that may have helped you write it, may have helped you structure the things properly. It's very hard to understand what's happening. So if you read the Army Network Campaign Plan or several or any disadex really, sometimes it can be hard to understand exactly what that means. So an example, any officers, former officers, anybody ever heard this word before, or this strategy before? So the current US military strategy, the term for it is Theory of Anti-Access Area Denial Asymmetric Strategies. Does anybody know what that means? This is how we fight wars. Does everybody know what this means? This is how we fight all of the foreign militaries. Basically, this translates to, we are bigger, we are faster, we are stronger, you can't defeat us. In terms of military personnel and equipment, tanks, carriers, that is 100% true. How long did it take us to take Baghdad? 67 days? I mean, we're too powerful. However, if you look at how wars are fought, this is not how we're fighting anymore. We have several million attacks per day from Beijing and Moscow. The wars are being fought on the cyber front. People are trying to steal information from us. In a few slides, I talk about all of the identities that have been stolen over the past year. And those numbers are significant. So just because they're not coming at us, we're not going to fight China in a land war. Nobody's going to invade the U.S. because we're all just too powerful for that. But where we're not all equally powerful is the protection of our IT assets. So, topic of today, Army Network Campaign Plan, a very strong document on the 5 task orders that the Army has to accomplish within the next 5 years. If you haven't read it, give it a quick perusal. It's pretty complex. I've tried to break it down as much as possible and make it very simple. We had a Army meeting internally at F5 recently, and one of our internal guys pulled up this document, and they pulled out the actual screenshots of the document, and they had the task orders as they're worded within the document. Nobody in the room understood what it meant. So in a couple slides, I'll hit exactly what that is. But before I hit that, is everyone familiar with the OSI model? Okay. So one thing to point out, and since we're going to talk about security a little bit in this, where do most organizations focus as far as cybersecurity and protection? Do you have IDS? Do you have IPS? Do you have firewalls? Can anybody tell me which layer those predominantly reside on? Correct. So, and does everybody know how those function? Does everybody know the difference between a positive security model and a negative security model? A whitelist versus a blacklist. So the DoD current implementations focus on a whitelist or a blacklist, more or less. So basically what that is a fail-open topology. If I have traffic that does not match a signature on my devices, let it through. Is that a secure model? In combination with other things, potentially. But it's much more secure to say, if you do not match exactly what I have said is allowed into my applications, drop it. Do not waste overhead, do not respond, do not allow footprinting, do not allow any sort of acknowledgement of this traffic whatsoever, drop it. Now that might not be the best way to allow users through. If you're a bank, yeah, maybe you want to let users through because maybe it's a valid customer accessing from overseas somewhere. But if I'm the DoD, unless I've given you explicit permission, it's how all of us that have clearances are able to access job sites. We can't go to work unless somebody can look us up in JPass, unless we have a CAT card, unless we have a specific clearance that says you are allowed in this building. I have work contracts where that has not been the case and where people lost their jobs because they were blinded by something and did not check people's clearances and backgrounds. And we had third country nationals walking onto G6 facilities and data centers on Quantico. So kind of the point of this is that most IDS, IPS focus in this tier. When I have identity stolen, when I have information stolen, when I have things that grant access to my environment, they happen on 5 through 7. Is everyone familiar with the RMF process? DITSCAP, DIACAP, whatever you want to call it today. In the old world, we used to do the ports and protocols table in the back of the submission. where you list the ports and protocols that you are going to open up in the firewalls to allow users to access those applications inside your network. This was before we started issuing, removing data sources from the DMZs and things like that. But we used to just have wide open holes into the network. This is kind of point out how old proxies, old firewalls used to function. Today it's evolved back to what it originally was. This was kind of a middle point with a normal proxy and firewall with the ports and protocols where you're allowing a specific connection from some subnet to some subnet on a specific protocol on a specific port directly to your servers. Now the problem there is that you have no visibility into that application. You're not opening up the SSL, you're not looking at the TLS, you're not evaluating the crypto. You still run in this today where IA says, I have to do SSL termination at the server. I have to have the CAC at the server. Does everybody have that issue today with some applications? Because there's several different factors that can contribute to that. Developers don't know how to tell the application to support Kerberos or SAML or NTLM or headers or whatever tokens need to be supplied to that application to take a lot of the overhead off. But again, you have no visibility. So you end up with kludgy solutions that are signing and re-signing and generating certs and things like that. Does anybody have any issues today with the current architectures within Army or within your environment that prevent CAC off at your systems? It happens. I have a customer that has to bypass all of the current security stacks in order to be able to provide training to the Army. So one of my customers in Fort Eustis that provides all the Blackboard and all of the stuff that everybody needs within the Army to get promoted, all of the tests and trainings and those things, they can't use the normal infrastructure because it breaks all of the access. It breaks the access to the attributes that are needed to determine date of rank and things like that we can pull back from an SSO provider. So where we are today is full proxy for most architectures. And what this means is you have dual stacks. You've got a server-side stack and a client-side stack. So the client-side stack would be where a user comes in and you have a device or a platform that validates compliance scenarios. Do they have HBSS? Do they have an antivirus? Do they have a firewall? Are they on a GFE or are they on a home system accessing over commercial? Anything like that, you can do the CAC authentication. And then on the server side, you can translate that to whatever is required. This changes a little bit when you're doing the RMF processes today because it gets more complex to determine what's going where. But in some aspects, it's much easier because in this scenario, you have to determine subnets that are allowed access, what those subnets are, what those IPs are. In this topology, the IP traffic tables are basically just from whatever this proxy device would be, whatever this is processing through the IDS IPS. And what this dual stack allows you to do is create a more intelligent security stack where I can break SSL traffic, TLS traffic, I can do the CAC authentication, I can send unencrypted traffic through any IDS, any IPS, you can throw FireEye, SourceFire, whatever, in the middle. Then you can re-encrypt on the server side. That gives you a lot of power because I can support IPv6 publicly. I can support elliptical curve, Diffie-Hellman ephemeral cipher suites publicly. Internally, maybe my servers don't support v6 yet. Maybe my servers can't handle the load of an elliptical curve cipher suite. We do have customers today that have servers that only support SSL v3, which is no longer permitted on the DoD networks. So to help them reach compliance, we help them look at different ways to achieve that. So 5 task orders. Single security architecture. Can anybody tell me what that means? Because it doesn't really have a meaning. Even if you Google it, this has no meaning. What they meant to say was standardization of hardware. And this also ties in with the strength in NetOps. Because if I've got different devices in every stack within the DoD, if I've got JRSS, that's one topology. If I've got TLA, that's another topology. If I have another architecture that's got completely separate devices, and then I'm contractor whatever, I've lost this contract, now I'm on this contract, I've got completely separate devices, how do I handle the NetOps if every stack that I work with is different? I don't have guys now that are certified to work with this. I don't have guys that have hands-on with that platform or this platform. It makes it extremely complex. So single security architecture is standardizing on architecture, basically. Strength in NetOps, I just kind of hit it on that one, where the biggest problem is having the guys that know the hardware. How many people here have Cisco certifications? Who has a Microsoft certification? Who has an F5 certification? So one. Do you have administrator or okay. So, and that's one of the problems that you run into in the DoD today. The F5s are everywhere. Has everybody in here seen an F5 before? Have you worked with an F5? They are in pretty much every architecture within the DoD. They're part of enterprise email. They're part of DEPS. They're part of DCMA. They're part of OPM. They're everywhere. They're integrated in the Pentagon. They're integrated with the AGS, which is now dead. But they're everywhere. They're a core part of not just Army infrastructure, but DoD infrastructure. But again, how can you maintain those if you don't have the personnel to support those devices, which we run into all the time? Increased throughput and services to the edge. How do I accelerate applications? That's one way. What is the most common way if I have a low latency link? What do I put in my network to make things faster across a WAN? WAN accelerators, things like that. How many WAN acceleration companies exist today? Now, Cisco does have WAN accelerator. Nothing against Cisco's, but the analogy I used earlier is how many products does Cisco have? And you're a Cisco guy, right? I'm not trash talking Cisco, but
I was going to say a lot.
A lot, right? I've got layer 2, I've got layer 3, I've got VoIP, I've got Wi-Fi. I guess that's layer 1. What else do they have? You know, oh yeah, they've got the whole UCS. They've got the whole consolidated compute and storage. So there's a ton of different things. Now Riverbed focuses only on acceleration of the WAN. That's it. So if I were to look at best in breed acceleration of the network, I would probably think WAN acceleration, right? Look at Riverbed. Cool, great. What about above layer 4? So I've got a WAN optimizer, and it's accelerating TCP. I'm doing TCP dedupe. I'm doing compression, optimization there. Why wouldn't I accelerate the garbage that I'm sending across the network? Who loves SharePoint? Exactly. So my previous life, I'm a certified SharePoint architect and developer. Before I came to F5, that was basically my life as Microsoft. I'm a certified Microsoft guy. It's a nightmare because of user acceptance. There are so many images, so much CSS, so much JavaScript, so much bloat that happens within the application that why would I focus on accelerating the network with all of that additional garbage? Who's used SharePoint? Who has access within their organization or has seen somebody get a brand new Nikon 80 optical zoom 8 billion megapixel camera, take a picture of General so-and-so and put it on their SharePoint site? Now I've got a 600 meg image, that's an exaggeration, obviously, and I shrink it down to 640 by 480 on the page because that's how much space I have available. That's still pointing to that 600 meg image. Why wouldn't I have something that optimizes that content, that streamlines the code, that removes white space, that minifies the Java, that organizes the content so it's non-blocking, so that I'm shrinking that 600 meg image down to a 640 by 480 size that's maybe 64K, that removes the metadata, the EXIF data from that image, so that I'm sending a 64K image across the link instead of that 600 meg image. So when we're looking at increasing throughput services to the edge, let's accelerate the application and not just the WAN. Disaster recovery and continuity of operations. Who has a data center that's 5 minutes, or the DR COOP data center that's 5 minutes from your standard data center? Does anybody know where the Fort Eustis next COOP data center is? Is anybody familiar with Virginia? Does anybody know where Fort Lee is? Does anybody know where Fort Eustis is? So how far apart are they? 20 minutes walking. Yeah. So, and this is, a lot of these have reference architectures today. One thing that we need to look at, and this came up when I did this talk in the Augusta show as well. One of the gentlemen that was in the presentation was a guy that had done some evaluation for the Pentagon in like the 90s. And he talked about disaster recovery and continuity of operations. And what the Pentagon had done is, they set different things up in different sides of the building, different, failover closets where switches and routers, whatever, everything was redundant. So if any closet went down, the rest of the building would be okay. But then they walk into the parking lot, and the guy says, well, where are all of our links running to? And they walk across the parking lot, go to a manhole, open up the manhole. Every single link in the building came into this one manhole. So he's like, well, what happens if somebody gets into this? Their solution was to weld it shut. So in the 90s, the Pentagon, with all their redundancy and everything, this is the 90s and early 2000s, all of their links came into one single manhole cover that they welded shut. And that was their DR Coop plan. Fort Eustis, their DR Coop plan is to fail over to Fort Lee in case anything happens. Now, Virginia's not known for hurricanes and things. We've had a pretty rough couple of years recently. But if the power grid that runs Hampton Roads, Fort Eustis, is hit, Fort Lee is in that same block. It's in that same power grid. It's right down the road. So the point here is that as you look at DR Coop, continuity of operations, and look at the plans and your architecture of where you're going to coop to, evaluate more than just, hey, it's cheap for me, I know the guy over at Fort Lee, or I know the guy over at Carson, or whatever. Make sure that there's some sort of distance. Make sure that you're evaluating things like power grids, distance, weather. Is anybody from SPAWAR? So does anybody know where SPAWAR's 2 data centers are? There's more than 2, but 2 core data centers, New Orleans, San Diego. What are those 2 locations known for? Disasters. So if I was going to build 2 data centers, yes, let's build it where the #1 hurricane location that's constantly flooded and things are always getting destroyed and washed out. And also let's build one where there's constant earthquakes and the possibility for both of those locations to slip into the ocean. It makes sense, right? I think the determining factor there was probably cost, not so much anything else. They're up and running. They haven't been hit too hard. There's been some failovers from New Orleans to San Diego, but nothing they couldn't handle. But when you're looking at things like that, one of the good examples that I've seen in my time at F5 has been Navy Medicine. So Navy Medicine had Charleston, and they had San Antonio. Charleston might get hurricanes every once in a while. San Antonio gets nothing. What's going to happen there? We're going to get invaded by Mexico. We're going to get, some cowboys are going to take over. I mean, the only problem that they had in that data center was user error. So if anybody remembers years ago when somebody walked out with several hundred thousand veterans' records, what happened was they were doing the off-site backups and somebody put the DLT tapes in a briefcase and then left it in their car. That's the only issue that's happened there. I mean, that can happen to anybody, but that's why we don't do things like that anymore. I had another bad example for you guys, but I can't remember what that one was now. Is everybody familiar with data center consolidation? Is everybody familiar with the milCLOUDs and commercial clouds? Is anybody looking at any cloud solutions? Has anybody done any proof of concepts with cloud solutions yet? Several Army customers have evaluated some of these. They're currently looking at several different cloud strategies and plans. And there's different pros and cons, whichever way you want to go. If you guys are looking at any of those plans, if you guys are Army, you can come talk to me. If you're not Army, I can put you in contact with your team that can help provide you with some options and some lessons learned that we've run into. The point here is not to point out which one is better, which one is worse, but to say we've had good experiences and bad experiences with all of them. Not everyone is focused on FedRAMP. Not everyone is focused on DISA cloud provider certifications and those sorts of things. Sometimes you don't get what you asked for. Sometimes cost isn't what you were originally quoted. Things can really skew exponentially. We are part of a lot of these cloud reference architectures. So we've been involved in a lot of the testing and the proof of concepts. And then the last task order, and I have a few more slides to go through. I'm trying to fire through these as quick as I can for you guys. So I've really only got 8 more slides to talk about. Reference architectures today, F5 has some that we've built based off of industry standards that we've built with Microsoft and Oracle and Cisco and other organizations on. If you look at SDN and you look at the orchestration of networks and software-defined networking and things like that, we're working with other industry leaders. We're not waiting for the RFCs to get approved and protocols to be developed. We're working with orchestration today to integrate all of our APIs. We have several reference architectures with Cisco to integrate with the ACI. We have several reference architectures with VMware on ESX and the cloud orchestrators. We integrate with SolarWinds and SCCM and pretty much anything out there that you might need to look at and evaluate as far as how you can build those environments out. We have reference architectures as F5 for the SSL offloading, the SSL orchestration, as we call it, for the SSL visibility. But then, where this most closely applies is the reference architectures for these task orders within the Army. We are part of all of these architectures today and can tell you lessons learned that we've run into in each of these situations. So just to hit a little bit more on the enhanced cyber. I don't know if everybody can see these numbers. I wanted to make it prettier, but the pie charts were just not working for me how I wanted them to work. I couldn't translate my brain into actual visual content. So just to what applies to us here today, all of this really applies to us. But government and military, 63 breaches last year. And these are the only ones that were advertised. So the 63 government and military breaches, it was 34 million identities that were basically stolen, that are now in the hands of foreign government, that are in the hands of some Silk Road website that are being sold off for who knows how many bitcoins. But it's out there. Overall, the number is 177 million. 56% of the population of the United States personal identifiable information is now available somewhere out there on the internet. All of us in this room that are in JPass, that have been a contractor, that were part of the OPM breach, it took them 2 years. That OPM breach was like 2 years ago. I just now got my notification in the past month. So if you didn't get a notification, it's probably coming. And let me tell you, if you haven't seen that OPM breach, what's the one called? My ID protection, whatever. OPM My ID. Yeah, it is frightening because they don't just throw in your identity, they throw in the sexual predators in your area and things going on, and they tell you things that you did not want to know. But it's probably coming. But that also means that now my identity information is out there somewhere in China or on Silk Roads or wherever. This is a significant number. And again, these are only the ones, this is last year. This is the 2015 report. You can go and download this document, or you can just Google Identity Breach Report 2015. They don't have the one for 2016 yet. I don't remember any significant breaches this year. Oh, I don't know if it applies to us, but the Adult Friend Finder. 400 million people in that database. The Ashley Madison breach last year. I queried the database for mail.mil. It was not good. Now, they also tell you that those were unverified. There's a checkbox in the database that says verified email. So they just try to let you off easy if you were in there. I don't know. My cousin had 2 accounts. So he's not very IT savvy, so he didn't know what he was doing. So path to JRSS and JIE. Is everybody planning on going to JRSS and JIE? I mean, that's what you have to do, right? You have to go to JRSS. You have to be part of this architecture. This I pulled from the most recent briefing on DIS's website. If you haven't seen it, this is publicly available. You don't have to have a CAC. you can go straight to DISA and download this presentation. Now, nobody that I know is able to understand these icons and what they mean. But just to give you a quick sort of rundown, you have a circle with a red middle with some slashes and some green slashes through it. This is installed. So, like, here's a half installed solution, half installed, 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 half installed. Then I've got activated. This does not mean it's processing traffic yet. I've got half activated, half activated, half activated. So I've got 3 half installed, half activated. Then I've got fully migrated. These means that these stacks are currently operational today, passing traffic from you. I've got 2 that are fully operational. They're just hard to, I don't know what the, that's where, again, where we get to nobody I know can translate these. So I do know for a fact JBSA is passing traffic over the JRSS stack. So I do know that for a fact. I used to cover JRSS for a while at F5, and then it was moved over to a larger team of engineers to help cover it. But this is the most recent deck that I've pulled off of the site.
There are more that are passing traffic.
They're passing traffic. They are currently maxed out on what they can pass. So just to give you a little background here with JRSS, and not pointing fingers at anything, and I won't say any names because I was told not to say names, someone, the original brainchild that came up with JRSS, said, give me the best of everything. So they went out, the architects, I won't say their names, picked out the best load balancer, picked out the best firewall, picked out the best SSL device, picked out the best IDS, the best IPS, and they slammed them all together. And they spent a year and a half working on it without talking to the vendors that built those appliances. Has everybody seen the actual architecture of JRSS? So you've got in, out, in, out, in, out, in, out, all around, and then you've got the base tier, then you've got up to here, and if I'm on the base and I come up to this tier, and then I come back through all these devices. Well, then they found out that best of breed one appliance wasn't Phipps. Then they found out best of breed other appliance didn't integrate well with this appliance. And then they finally call the vendors, and we spend tons of time helping them figure out how to deploy this. But they don't want people to deploy them. They want scripts to deploy these stacks. So they send people to make sure it's racked and stacked, and then to run scripts. But the people running the scripts don't know what the scripts do. So then we have a couple hundred tickets opened up on, hey, I ran this script to deploy this device, but now I can't manage the device because the script was turning all the ports off. And then they forgot to renew support. So all of the devices that are currently set to be installed had no support, which for us means that those devices couldn't be activated. They can't be powered up and configured. So we had to fix that problem. They're currently moving better now. They have support. We're looking at structuring these more intelligently. I think the most recent stack was out here. I think we just did the Humphreys stack, so that's moving along. The problem is this is a great idea, but I don't think it's in a place right now for you to be prepared to jump over within the next year. It's not ready, probably won't be ready for, I mean, the goal was to have this up in 2017. And we're not in a position right now. There's not enough manpower to get this where it needs to be as fast as it needs to be there. And we're working with this to help this be successful, but this was a situation where I'm trying to help emphasize, reach out to the vendors and think about the architecture a little bit differently. You can't just say, I want the best of breed and all these different appliances, never talk to the people that operate them on a daily basis and expect it to just work perfectly. It takes a lot of work. I am not afraid to work with competitors. In the JRSS stack, we are load balancing Palo Altos. This is a joint solution. My goal is to help you. My goal isn't to fight with another competitor. My goal is to help you succeed in what you need to accomplish. So if you bought F5s, you bought Palos, you bought Fidelis, you bought whatever, I don't care. I'm here to help you make that work. So you don't have to worry about calling because you've got a competitive solution. If you've got a Cisco UCS because you're still in Germany, or not UCS, the ACE, because you're in Germany and it wasn't end of life, I don't care, run what makes you happy. It's not going to last forever because nobody's going to remember how to run them anymore, but call the vendors, call the people that do this on a regular basis. Do not be afraid to reach out and ask us questions on how to make those things work better. So I talked about RMF a little bit. Is everybody familiar with this? Has everybody gone through this nightmare? I have done so many DITSCAP and DIACAP and RMF deployments that it is a nightmare. And it's also my biggest nightmare because at F5, I am kind of responsible for this. These are not easy to understand in a lot of aspects. The way that they're worded, and I helped DISA write these for the F5 products. And we went through several specifics, and I sat with the guys on the phone, and we went through every single one. And if you've never done like a vendor self-evaluation form with DISA for STIGs and SRGs, there are several thousand items that you have to go through. You have to meet this requirement. You have to meet this requirement. You have to understand if you're not applicable. If you are applicable, how do you configure that fix? So if you've never read through the STIGs, you have check text, you have fixed text. So you basically have, how do I configure this to meet this requirement in this STIG? Do you know how many customers I have that never read that? That don't understand that they're waiting for somebody to respond to an email or opening up a support case and spending 8 hours when all they had to do is scroll down a little bit? It's significant. I mean, this is a regular occurrence where we even have guys internally at F5 that maybe they don't know about STIGs, they're not super familiar with it because they've never been a contractor, they've never had to submit a DITSCAP, DIACAP, RMF package, so they're not familiar with how to write in this is configured because blah, or we pointed this to a AAA to accomplish this. It's insane. We were on the APL. This is something that we internally are heavily focused on, is government compliance and certifications. Some aspects we're looking at FedRAMP for our cloud offering solutions. We're on the APL. I am doing this right now for our next release. If you're in the Army and you're familiar with Certificate of Net Worthiness, this was a process that we went through, at least it was a year or two, of explaining and re-explaining that the F5 is a network appliance, that there are STIGs, that there are SRGs, that this is a device, not software. So if you're familiar with APL, on the APL, there's not software, there's hardware. If you're familiar with Certificate of Net Worthiness, there's no hardware, it's software. So explaining this to people that, what it is, there's no need for a Certificate of Net Worthiness for F5 on a DoD network, especially in the Army. Is everyone familiar with Special Publication 853 Revision 4? Revision 5 is currently in draft, may have been approved. This is actually the baseline for FedRAMP. We have a wizard on our appliances that you can run and be done in 5 minutes. Be Special Publication 853 Revision 4 or 5 compliant right away. Is everyone familiar with the different Phipps? Does everybody know Phipps 199? So Phipps 199 is relating to CAC readers. Phipps 140-2, does everybody know what Phipps 140-2 is? Phipps 140-2 is two things. It is the ciphers that are used for all crypto, and they're how the private keys are stored on the device. And we run into the confusion here quite often. There's different levels to Phipps. Phipps level 1 is a Windows server. It is certified up to level 1 because it is software. It is not using a hardware security manager to store the private keys. It is a private key storage in the operating system that allows you to do cryptographic operations that meet DoD requirements. Red Hat has this. I think CentOS has this currently. It's been a while since I read through the current approved list, a couple of days. But software level 1. Nobody ever says which level they require. The STIGs don't specifically call out a level on which Phipps is required. It just depends on how those STIGs and SRGs are interpreted. Level 2 is sticker Phipps. Yep. That one specifically called out. So for us, and for like the Enclave STIG and the AppDev STIG, It just says if you're doing crypto, you will use these ciphers. You'll have a Phipps HSM, Phipps certified HSM, which is different than, and the wording is different. So if you look at crypto, it says the crypto used will be compliant, Phipps compliant crypto. The HSM will be certified HSM. List of certified HSMs currently available on NIST. So you can look at that and evaluate what's applicable to your environment. Level 2, sticker Phipps. It just means you have a physical box and it has a sticker on it that lets you know if somebody tampered with it. Level 3 is zeroing. So if anybody tampers with the box, anybody tries to touch anything, the HSM zeroes out and erases all of the private keys. These can really screw up your environment. If you have systems that are doing Phipps for you, and you've got them set up in an HA pair, you have something happen on your network, it is possible for you to lose all private keys for all of the applications that you are publishing in your environment. Yeah, and it happens quite often. And that's where I try to explain the different tiers of Phipps, because a lot of times people, you'll get a new device and you'll try and add it to a device group, but you don't have your password for your Phipps HSM. You're SOL. And so that's why I try and point it out. These are things that need to be documented that somebody needs to understand. And again, that's an issue where if another contractor comes in and everybody from the old contract is gone, you just might be SOL. I think there's a DISA application that's got over 300 some apps, all published, and they were having issues with access to the private keys, and they didn't own the apps. So basically they would have to figure out how to get the private keys and the certs re-imported for 300 different applications, which is pretty significant. Is anybody working on IDAM and SSO? So this is a big deal in the Army today. Is everybody familiar with AKO, Army Knowledge Online? Army Knowledge Online, AKO, was a provider of SSO for the Army for several years. As far back as 2004 that I can remember working with it. And it still exists today. They at one point had 4 million active email users. If you were an Army contractor, you had access to AKO or DKO, and you had the ability to have a us.army.mil email address. And then Enterprise Email came out. And then Enterprise Email failed, and everybody went back. And now Enterprise Email is working again. I won't point out the whys and hows, even though we do know them, of how they failed. But this is a big deal for the Army today, because AKO still exists, but for the extent of us.army.mil. Who has a us.army.mil namespace anymore? These are only legacy applications. Everybody is mail.mil now. So you only have several legacy applications that, if you're looking at SSO solutions, and if anybody is Army, a memo went out last year, the year before, so 2 years ago, that said, we are going to eliminate SSO from AKO, be off of our system by May, September. Done. Your users that use CAC will be off by this date. Your users that are username and password will be off by this date. So the Army started scrambling. How do we fix this? How do we set this up? We've got customers that found a way to do it. Now, you are going to have some users at us.army.mil, but if I am currently active within the DoD today, I have a mail.mil email address. If I pull up my CAC, I have my EDIPI at mil, which is my normal identifier, and I have my so-and-so.so-and-so.so-and-so at mail.mil. So how do I log into the system? I might have an old admin CAC, I might have an AKO CAC, whatever the case might require. But is everybody familiar with DMDC? If you are government or if you are a contractor, you have a CAC that you got from DEERS. DMDC owns DEERS. DMDC also has a logon service where they have all of your service record book details stored and accessible from SAML. So if I'm an organization like Fort Eustis and I'm at TRADOC and I run all of your training information, I need to know your date of rank and any sort of thing that I can tie to your promotion, I would use something like DMDC to access those attributes about you that are stored in your service record books. DISA AGS, so DISA Authentication Gateway Services, this was sunset June, end of July, I think it was. They don't all know that yet, but they published this big memo and presentation that said we are sunsetting this. So that's not entirely an option anymore. Is everybody familiar with the Netcom IDMI? So for your service, there might be, if you're not Army, you might have an IDMI, or you might have a different term from it. Basically what it is, It's an ADLDS feed from DISA. It is a read-only Active Directory service, LDAP, that you can read from that has all DoD in it. The problem that you run into with this solution is that nothing supports it. So if you have an application like SharePoint that you would like to integrate all of the services into, you need to have some developers on site that understand claims, security tokenization services, translating those services into SharePoint, and then how to tie that into people pickers and security and all those other aspects that you might need to tie into. So yeah, it sounds great, and it is. It's not a bad solution, but your applications might not support it. And if they can support it, it's probably going to take some additional development time. So the big thing for Army today is federation. Is everybody familiar with federation? SAML, security assertion markup language. What it does is it basically allows me to grant access to someone that I approve based on some sort of criteria that is not part of my Active Directory, that is not part of a AAA that I own in my environment. So some examples of where this is used today, a combination with federation, with DMDC and local ADs and some other services. Is everybody familiar with ATEC out at APG, the Aberdeen Proving Grounds? So Aberdeen Proving Grounds has a solution today running with the Marine Corps where they have some test solutions available that allow the Marine Corps access to their SharePoint and their project management servers using nothing but F5s. So what they do is they can look at the CAC, they can look at the issuing CA, they can look at the attributes on the certificate, which contains your branch, which contains your office, your state, your country of origin, your whatever that they need to determine. And what they can do is they can grant access to their environment based on those attributes. They also have a pretty cool solution set in place that we're running where it does real-time user provisioning, where they want to pull the users into their Active Directory so they can set additional attributes and set timeouts on their accounts. To say, okay, maybe this user's coming in, we're going to grant them access permanently, they can come in, we're going to federate, we're going to generate a token, they can come in, good, we're done. Or let's pull all their X5 and 9 attributes from their CAC. Let's pull additional attributes from DMDC. Let's create an account for them in our local Active Directory and set a timeout so they have access for 8 hours. Or kick off a workflow. Say this is a contractor of some sort, where they come in, they find out, okay, this is a contractor, so we're not going to just grant them access, we're going to kick off a workflow. Who is their government sponsor? Let them select from a list. They select a government sponsor, that person gets an email, they say yes, they say no, whatever, and it kicks off the rest of this workflow so that users are generated based off of whatever terms, and they're also tied to a specific sponsor to grant them access to that solution. Where a lot of this is important, everybody's probably not familiar with these OMBs. Basically what they all focus on is CAC authentication. Is everybody familiar with did everybody see Bill's presentation earlier this week on privileged user access? So DUDI 8520.03, basically what this is anybody that accesses a government system for management access to those devices, it has to be multi-factor. So if I'm going to access a switch, I'm going to access a router, I'm going to access a Linux server, I'm going to access the F5s or whatever may be on your network, your users have to authenticate with their admin CAC. How do you accomplish that? You can go download PuttyCAC, which was written by a former Air Force guy 10 years ago. It's not supported. Who knows where he is today. You can find a solution that may or may not support CAC authentication through SSH. That may work. If you didn't see Bill's presentation, we've got some pretty fantastic solutions that wrap around this. How we can do all of the things that I kind of talked about. We can do evaluation of what network they're on, their CAC, if it's an admin CAC, if not, translate it to those applications. And we even have an HTML5 SSH client. The problem that I run into with Army is maybe somebody has secure CRT. Maybe somebody has PuTTY. Maybe they are on an environment that they've got Linux servers and they're running Node.js. Sounds insane, but it is a reality. So like Aberdeen has a bunch of servers that are actually Linux servers running Node. So they can use those as a jump box and they can access their systems and things like that. So how do you interpret that? How do you allow access to different SSH clients? So we found workarounds to allow you access to get a drop page where, your landing page where you log in to your management network, And you get a page that lists all of your switches, all of your routers, all of your Linux servers, and you can just click on it and it opens up in your web browser. Streamlines the CAC authentication, streamlines the SSO, and is able to audit and manage the connections while you're in there without having to have anything installed on the client, without modifying the GFE or the Army Gold Master, whatever your standard is for your environment. SSL orchestration, I don't have any big demonstrations on this. Bill has some demonstrations available somewhere. It's really hard to see without something that shows you the SSL like Splunk. And it can show you some real fantastic charts and things on how much traffic is unencrypted, what you're accessing, what you're doing, all of those things like that. The real thing here is that there are solutions for this. When you're looking at the enhanced cyber, when you're looking at awareness of what users are doing, it's not just inbound traffic. All of the issues and vulnerabilities that we've had in the government and DoD over the past 2 years have been insider leaks, insider vulnerabilities. Everyone familiar with the DCMA and the Pentagon hacks? Does everybody know what those were? Somebody internal to those organizations, Cold Fusion developers, put in code that allowed users to browse file shares under domain admin permissions. That wasn't somebody externally injecting the code. That was somebody that worked there modifying the Cold Fusion code to allow users to browse file shares. Those were inside threats. Does everybody know what Snowden did? Booted up a live Linux disk, copied some crap, uploaded it to the internet. This isn't rocket science. The guy wasn't super hacker. Now that he's some sort of IA guru for Russia or whatever he's doing today, this is, how do you control that? How do you make sure that users aren't accessing your sites with Linux live disks? How do you make sure that they're on a GFE? They've got HPSS, they've got all of that stuff. How do you make sure that they're not uploading documents to WikiLeaks? There are solutions that are very powerful that allow you to see everything they're doing, that allow you to control what they're accessing within your environments. One of the issues that I run into is that customers always put F5 so that external users come through. Oh, my internal users are on a GFE, they're already CAC authenticated, I don't care. We don't need to do the CAC auth, we don't need to do that, they're good. That's a bad practice. Why not put it in front of all of your users? If I've got a security tool in my environment that can evaluate every aspect of a user's connection and build intelligent rules about how they access those applications, why not use it? Otherwise, you're going to end up with another leak situation. If I can prevent users from injecting code internally, that's where I really need to focus. I need to focus externally, yeah, but everybody does that. Focus internally as well. So, other Army use cases. Anybody have any questions so far? I've got like one slide left, and I've kind of already talked about it. We are part of the architecture in G357. We're part of the architecture at Netcom. We're part of the TLA Future Stack. We're part of the APG stacks. We're all over the place. We're in the Guard facilities. We're all over the place. So we've got several different use cases and references that we can tell you guys about. These ones are probably the most interesting. My favorite is the Fort Eustis configurations as well as the Aberdeen configurations. Not the NEC. So if you guys are familiar with the Fort Eustis NEC, my favorite use case out there is Rich Noe at TRADOT, ATSC, for the Army training applications. He's got a fantastic setup. User provisioning, federation, access to the Blackboards, access to the SharePoints, access to the project servers. They also have some developmental Glassfish servers that we provide a lot of capabilities to. And then Aberdeen is using us for all of their identity provider and service provider access, providing the federation for the Marine Corps to access all of those systems and applications as well. No questions, comments? Nothing? Okay, so the last slide is the privileged user access. We talked about that, so I won't harp on it anymore. If you guys have any questions, you want to talk to your account teams, you want to see anything that I talked about today in a real-life scenario, use case, reference architecture, anything like that, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We can put you in contact with your account team if you're not currently in contact with them. I cover Army. Normally I'm on the East Coast. Hopefully this is my last trip out here because the flight is terrible from Philly. I love it out here, but it's killer. especially when they pile you in coach and you're just mashed in. Yeah. And plus my connection this time was from Atlanta, so Atlanta to Oahu is not fun. So, all right, that's it. You guys don't have anything? Then, yeah, absolutely.
What would you say to DoD customers who are concerned about, I guess, putting too many eggs in one basket? That's a lot of power and authority right there.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it all just depends. A lot of times you want to split things up, but then you're looking at, especially with the consolidation projects, consolidating point solutions that may cost more money. I won't reference a specific vendor, but there's a vendor out there that does a lot of similar things that we do. And they do it in like 8 boxes, where we'll do it in 1. And we'll do it, we'll add 2, so you've got redundancy, you've got that failover capability, so if one dies, the other takes over. But then we're also structured so that we've got global availability and redundancy. Originally, F5 started as a redundancy company, load balancing traffic. So everything that we do is kind of built around, that's the core function that we do. So as far as eggs in one basket, as far as redundancy and failover, we'll add 2. I usually don't recommend an architecture that has less than 2 F5s in it. As far as putting all of that functionality in a single basket, that used to be more of an issue a couple years ago. But as we're consolidating more and more, and looking at collapsing, I need to collapse a rack, I need to collapse data centers, and people are getting shut down, it's gotten a lot more popular. The Marine Corps wasn't super big on a lot of the consolidation until we sat down with MarCorps Syscom and we walked through the actual rack consolidation. We even have existing customers that can consolidate their F5 solutions. So like the JRSS stack, there's 2 8U F5s in those stacks. Those can be collapsed down to like 4U. So it's not just the F5 consolidation stuff, but overall consolidation. So it's not as much of an issue as it used to be.
I'm thinking more from like a compromise perspective.
Right.
F5 got compromised. Now lots of things are compromised. Right?
Yeah. So that's one thing that, I mean, the architecture of the F5, and again, I didn't come to kind of sell you guys in the F5, but one of the things that's cool about the F5 appliances is it's individual microkernels for different functions on the F5. So a few years ago when Heartbleed came out, there are vendors that do things differently in their processing of memory and how their microkernels handle the information, where if I was able to penetrate one of those devices and exploit the Heartbleed, I could get all of the sessions on that entire device. If I were to perform that same function on the F5 in the 2 days while we were vulnerable to that specific vulnerability, you could only get that specific session. So you would have to penetrate and you would only have a dump from that exact session. You wouldn't have all of the other 100,000 existing sessions or 7 million existing sessions on that device. It would be that specific session. So we kind of segregate. If you're not familiar with the F5 architecture, depending on the platforms, we have what's called VCMP, which is Virtual Clustered Multiprocessing, where we actually have a segregated backplane as well. So every interface on the F5 is a SIC. It's a switch interface card basically that ties individually to our backplane and our operating system and how we process on those layers. They have different access to our FPGAs and how we handle that content, and it's all segregated on the backplane. So depending on which platforms I have, I can completely segregate all traffic, have multi-tenancy, and none of that information is available to any other users on that system depending on how it's set up. So, I mean, and yes, you could have some vulnerabilities, but then for DoD, we really only talk about like Phipps devices. And we talk about segregating the traffic that needs to be segregated. And then you get into where IA interprets segregation of traffic. Do I need to have a separate physical device on public DMZ, Zone A, Zone B, whatever, that I have on my LAN? And most of the times you're not going to see the same device that resides in the DMZ on the LAN. We do have justification in some DoD facilities where we are spanning multiple zones. But most commonly, IA interprets that segregated traffic as different devices. So if I was able to get into one F5 in the architecture, I might not be looking at any CAC authenticator or unencrypted data. I might just be looking at the SSL or the DDoS traffic that we blocked, or the signatures that we were blocking from the application, accessing at a much lower tier within the security stack. And it is something that we're focused on. So a couple years ago, F5 started rebranding ourselves as a security company. We have our own CERT now. We have our own security incident response team. We are getting much better at responding to CVEs. We are adjusting for fire. We've changed our entire SDLC, so our software development lifecycle is completely modified from what it was 2 years ago. And we're focused on developing patches and getting things, out much faster than we used to. No more questions? Awesome.